The man who didn't mind losing. He woke up before the mail truck came. He always did. The mornings were slow here, slow in a way that felt earned. The kettle took its time. The floorboard sighed as if remembering footsteps from another century. From the kitchen window, he could see the lake, the color of tarnished silver, the mist still clinging to it like a thought that didn't want to end. He stirred his coffee with a spoon that had lost its shine, added a small cloud of milk, and stood at the window, watching the mail road. The letter would come today. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. The house had belonged to his late sister, though it was really older than both of them. A square of cedar and stone tucked into a bend of birch and wind. He'd been living there for 8 years now, long enough to know which shingles leaked and which pipes shivered when the temperature dropped. His neighbors thought of him as that professor who retired early, the one who never went to church, who read on his porch in winter, who didn't seem to need anyone. They were right about most of it. But what they didn't know, and what he didn't bother to tell, was that he hadn't retired. He'd simply stopped showing up one day. At 10:14, the sound of tires crunching gravel pulled him from his thoughts. The mail truck. He opened the screen door, coffee still in hand, and waved at May, the mail carrier. She was young, cheerful, the kind of person who could say have a nice day, without irony. "There's one that looks important today," she said, tapping the corner of a cream envelope before sliding it into his hand. "Nice handwriting, too. Not a bill, that's for sure." "Thank you, May." "Anytime, Professor." He smiled faintly. The title no longer fit, but people liked using it. It made them feel polite, maybe even deferential, as if speaking to a memory of authority. He stood by the mailbox long after she'd driven away. The envelope was thick, the paper heavy. The return address said Cambridge, Massachusetts. He knew who it was from before he opened it. Inside was a letter written in looping, careful script. "Dear Dr. Hale, I hope this finds you well. You may not remember me, but I was in your seminar in 1997, The Ethics of Losing. You said something once that has stayed with me for 28 years, that the world mistakes victory for value and failure for truth. I've written a book. It's dedicated to you. If you're willing, I'd like to visit. With gratitude, Ellen March." He read it twice, then a third time, letting the ink sink into him. Ellen March. He remembered her immediately. The way she questioned everything, even the phrasing of her own doubts. She'd been brilliant, restless, easily dismissed by others because she spoke softly. He remembered the final paper she turned in, titled The Dignity of Being Wrong. It had been the best thing he ever read. He folded the letter and set it on the table beside his mug. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, a few crows were arguing in the birches. Their noise felt oddly cheerful. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. The name Ellen March moved through his thoughts like a stone skipping over still water. What would she want after all these years? A conversation? An explanation? Closure? He wasn't sure he had any of those things to give. That afternoon, he walked down to the lake with a book under his arm. It was a habit, half exercise, half ritual. The path curved through ferns and moss and ended in a small clearing where an old bench leaned toward the water. He sat, listened. A loon called from the far side of the lake, a long, unbroken sound that always felt to him like memory itself, part grief, part endurance. He thought about the letter again, about what it meant to have been remembered and by whom. For years he had lived quietly, almost invisibly, convinced that silence was the only honest position left. He had seen too many colleagues scramble for attention, too many ideas twisted into slogans, too many truths sold as books. He had walked away from all of it, and he had never regretted it. Until now. The next morning, he found himself pacing the kitchen before sunrise. He had decided to write back. He sat at the table, pen poised over a yellow notepad, but the words refused to come. What does one say to someone who insists you change their life? Especially when you're not sure you even changed your own. After several false starts, he wrote, "Dear Ellen, of course I remember you. I'd be honored to see you again. This address will find me. The lake is as stubbornly beautiful as ever. Yours, H." He didn't sign with his full name. He never liked how Professor Harold Hale sounded. Too pompous, too finished. He sealed the envelope and left it in the mailbox. As he raised the flag, the wind carried the faint smell of rain. By the time she arrived, 5 days later, the air had shifted. A storm had passed through, washing the sky clean. The driveway, slick with pine needles, glistened in the weak sun. He saw the car pull up, a small blue hybrid. A woman stepped out, taller than he remembered, her hair streaked with gray. She looked around before spotting him on the porch. "Dr. Hale," she said, smiling. "You look exactly the same." He laughed softly. "That's very kind of you, but I'm sure I don't." She shook his hand, her grip warm, steady. "It's good to see you again. And you. Come in, please." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and old wood. She glanced at the walls lined with books, the few framed photographs, the lake beyond the window. "You really did leave everything behind," she said quietly. "I suppose I did. Do you miss it?" He poured 2 mugs of coffee. "The noise? Not really. The people, sometimes." They sat across from each other at the table. She took a slow sip, studying him. "Do you know how many of your students still talk about that class?" He looked up. "I can't imagine there'd be many. There are more than you think. I met one in Chicago last year. She said you were the only professor who ever told her it was okay not to win." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like something I'd say." They talked for hours. About her book. About the years between. About the strange luxury of growing older without needing to prove anything anymore. The sun sank behind the trees, and the lake turned dark, mirroring the sky. She told him she'd written her book during a time when her career had nearly collapsed. The title, she explained, was The Art of Yielding. He nodded. "That's a good title." "It was yours, actually," she said. "From one of your lectures. You said that to yield isn't to give up. It's to let meaning come through you instead of from you." He tried to remember saying it, but he couldn't. "I used to talk too much," he said. She laughed. "You did. But it mattered." Later, after she'd gone to her guest room, he stepped outside. The moon was high. The air smelled of pine and rain and time. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not pride, exactly, but a kind of warmth that came from being seen, not for what he'd done, but for what he'd quietly allowed to happen. He looked at the water. The reflection of the moon rippled, then steadied. He whispered to no one in particular. Maybe losing isn't the right word after all. In the morning, she'd be gone, back to her life, her city, her noise. But for now, the night belonged to the sound of dust settling on the shelves, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the steady pulse of his heart reminding him that even endings can hum with life. And as he stood there, the faintest hint of dawn touching the horizon, a thought formed, slow, sure, like a tide coming in. The morning she left, the station was half asleep. A single bench, 2 vending machines, and a stray cat who had made them all his kingdom. He stood by her car, hands in his pockets, the mist rising from the lake behind him. Ellen had her suitcase open in the trunk, rearranging things with the precision of someone who didn't like goodbyes. "You'll miss your train if you keep that up," he said. "I never miss trains," she replied, zipping the bag. "They miss me." He smiled. "You always did believe in symmetry." "It's not symmetry," she said, closing the trunk. "It's control." Even worse." They both laughed, softly, as if not to wake something sleeping in the air. The drive to the station took 20 minutes. The road wound between birch trees and pastures, sunlight flashing through the leaves like pieces of a broken mirror. They spoke little, as if conversation would break the fragile balance between distance and connection. He liked silence when it had purpose, and with her, it did. At the small-town station, the air smelled faintly of diesel and coffee. A single platform stretched toward the horizon, its edges blurred by fog. Ellen checked her ticket, then looked up at him. "You never married, did you?" He shook his head. "I tried once." She preferred music to philosophy. "I couldn't compete." "What did she play?" "Cello." "That's hard to compete with," she said gently. He nodded. "Yes, the cello has gravity." They walked to the far end of the platform, where a wooden bench sat under a broken light. The train wasn't due for another 15 minutes. "You know," she said, "people still talk about you as if you vanished on purpose. Like you were making some kind of statement." "Maybe I was," he said, "though I'm not sure what it meant anymore. You left at the height of your career. Everyone thought you were about to publish something big. I was. What happened?" He looked at the tracks. "I started writing about loss. Then I realized I didn't understand it. Not the way I thought I did. So you stopped." I couldn't finish a sentence without it feeling dishonest. "So yes, I stopped." Ellen leaned back, considering that. "Do you regret it?" "Not the stopping. The arrogance, maybe. Believing I had something final to say." A train whistle echoed in the distance. He could see her expression change, some mixture of resolve and sadness. "I wish I'd had you as a mentor longer," she said. "I think I would have made fewer mistakes." "I doubt that. The good ones never listen." She smiled, eyes glinting. "So I was a good one?" "The best." For a moment, they were quiet again. The fog thinned. The metal of the rails began to shimmer in the light. "Ellen," he said finally, "do you ever think about how much we owe to the people who misunderstood us?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "If no one had called me a failure, I might have spent my life trying to prove them wrong. Instead, I learned to enjoy the quiet." She nodded slowly. "That's beautiful. Painful, but beautiful." The train arrived in a rush of noise and movement. The cat darted under a bench. A conductor leaned out, calling for passengers. Ellen turned to him. "Will you read the book?" "I already started," he said. "Last night." "And?" He hesitated. "It's not about me, but it understands me." "That's rarer." She smiled, and for the first time, he saw in her something like peace. "Goodbye, Dr. Hale." "Harold," he corrected softly. "I'm only a doctor when someone's bleeding." "Then goodbye, Harold." She stepped onto the train. The door closed with a metallic sigh, and in a moment she was gone, folded into motion, into sound, into everything that moves on while something stays behind. He watched the train disappear until the last echo dissolved into the morning air. Then he sat on the bench. The cat returned, brushing against his leg. He scratched its head absent-mindedly. "She's doing better than all of us," he said to no one. He took from his pocket a folded piece of paper, the dedication page from her book, which she had left on the kitchen table. "For the one who taught me that losing is a form of seeing." He read it again, then slipped it back into his coat. The station attendant, a man with a round face and the steady calm of someone who'd seen too many departures, came over. "She family?" he asked. "Something like that," Harold said. "Good visit." "Yes." The attendant nodded toward the tracks. "Funny, isn't it? How people always think trains take them away from something, not toward it." Harold smiled faintly. "You sound like a philosopher." "Nah," the man said. "Just been standing here a long time." On the drive home, the sun burned off the last of the fog. The world looked sharper now, edges defined, shadows honest. He passed the small church, the closed library, the old diner where he sometimes went for pie on Thursdays. Everything was as it had been, and yet something in him had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. He pulled over once, halfway up the hill, and looked down at the lake glinting below. For the first time in years, he thought about going back to his desk. Not to teach, not to prove anything, but to write again. Maybe not about losing. Maybe about understanding what's left after you do. That night, the house felt less empty. The letter lay open on the table, beside her book. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey and sat by the window. The wind was up. The trees whispered like an audience leaning in. He opened a notebook and wrote the first line he'd written in nearly a decade. It begins, as most truths do, with a departure. He paused, looking at the words, then added, "And sometimes the one who leaves isn't the one who goes." He closed the notebook. The sentence stayed in his mind, breathing softly. Outside, the moon rose, pale and patient. The cat, Ellen had called it Rufus, was curled by the steps. Somewhere out on the lake, a loon called, answering itself across the dark water. He sat there until the sound faded, and when it did, he whispered the same phrase that had ended the first chapter of his new life.